Hi everyone, my name is Akriti Rawat. I am working as a drinks writer and interviewer at Brewer World, India's only beer and brewing industry dedicated online platform. Today we have with us Mr. Mark Hopday. Mark is the head of training at Brewdog. He's a beer expert. Mark joined Brewdog nearly a year ago. He is passionate about wine, beer, and spirits. He is also passionate about supporting and developing people. He has been a qualified mental health first aider for a few years now and is happy to chat or just listen to anyone who wants to learn more about, like needing any advice or any or. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, how you doing? Pleased to be here.
Good, good. So, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? How, like what inspired you to become a beer expert, and how did you get started in the industry?
Absolutely. So, goodness, when I talk about this, it makes me feel quite old, but I started in the industry almost 20 years ago when I was 18. So I started working as a bartender in a bar, and I think that's probably where my sort of passion for, especially for beer, really started from there. And I kind of did many years, kind of working as I said, as a bartender, moving my way up through into kind of a manager role. And then it just kind of probably within the last 5 or 6 years, I kind of found my passion from a training element. So teaching people to be as passionate about beer as I've said already about wine and spirits as well. But beer kind of became quite a bit of a passion for me probably about 10 years ago. Um, and actually, that's probably when the kind of like I don't have to call myself a beer expert, but I am passionate about beer and I like to talk about beer. So maybe you can kind of constitute it as that. But actually, funnily enough, it was a Brewdog beer, which was the first when I tried my first IPA. So it's beer. For that, I was just a bit of a lager drinker, and then I tried my first pint of punk, and I said it was about 10 years ago, and it just kind of blew my mind. It was sort of like, what is this drink? It's like nothing that I've ever kind of like had before. And it was at that point where it kind of made me realize there's so much more to the beer industry than just lager, with the complexity and the different type of IPAs and other weird and wonderful beers that we kind of do now. It kind of that's where my passion really sort of came from. So ever since then, just trying lots of different beers, experimenting with different types, and then joining Brewdog a year ago was just an organization that I've always been so interested in. And being able to head up their training for that is a kind of dream. So yeah, it sort of started when I was super young, and now at the age I'm at now, I'm really excited with what's to come.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role? Like, what
Yeah,
is, yeah.
yeah, of course. So head of training. So I mean, I've probably not enough time on this call to talk about everything I do, but
Mhm.
I support a lot of all of our new openings. So last year I got to travel to Atlanta to help them open up our site there. I spent 5 weeks in Las Vegas at the end of last year, which just blew my mind. But it was a incredible site. So I do a lot of the project work around training the teams. I also have a collection of what I call regional trainers, one in Australia, Europe, UK, America, where I kind of support, coach them, and they deliver a lot of the training to our teams. They also support with some of the openings. So I do a lot of support of them. Also, the creation of content. So when we do open up new bars, we want to train them on the history of a Brewdog. We want to train them on beer, of course, how to treat our guests, how to talk to our guests, how to talk about beer. So I create a lot of the content, whether that's face-to-face training material, video material, creating online courses. Yeah, so it's just so broad. So I kind of look over the whole training strategy for BrewDog, and I've got a small team around me who kind of help me in regards to delivering that.
What are some of the qualities to look for in a good beer, and how can people really identify them?
Make sure it's fresh. I think that's one of the things BrewDog especially really pride ourselves on, but really like to talk about making sure that beer is fresh. Okay,
Right.
that's one of the reasons why you'll find the majority of our beer that we don't have out at the taps, it comes in a can because it doesn't get exposed to light, which can degrade the quality of the beer so quickly. So that freshness is really important. And from a kind of identity perspective, how can you identify that? It's things like aroma, so and the flavor. That's going to be the things that you're going to notice like straight away. If you have a beer from a tap from a bar, or you open up a can or a bottle, you're going to be able to smell whether it's kind of maybe not as quality as it should. It might smell like vinegar or wet cardboard or things like that. So it's really making sure you're using all of your senses when it comes to aroma and taste to really be able to see how quality that perspective. But also, even if it's fresh and it tastes great, for me, how you can identify the real quality of a beer is the flavors. So making sure they're kind of balanced. Okay,
Right.
so you don't want a beer to have one overpowering flavor that just then you can't taste anything else. You know, you get so much flavor and stuff from the hops and from the malts that we use. The yeast has an effect on that as well. So you want to make sure that all your beers are kind of balanced, but fresh, balanced, and look after it.
Right. Talking about the flavors and aromas, if somebody who's getting started, in craft beers, like somebody
Mhm.
who wants to experiment with their palate, what are some of
Yeah.
the must-try beers that you would, recommend them to start with?
Must try beers to start with. So you kind of want a bit of a broad spectrum. So when I'm speaking to people about getting to understand beers, go for a kind of a lager from a kind of basic, fresh, crisp, great for the summer months, like a Pilsner or something. And then you can sort of, it's a bit more of a kind of basic flavor, but it's a really good way to introduce yourself. And then a kind of IPA. So sometimes, like a punk or maybe Hazy Jane. So you get more of a fruity and it's more of an accessible kind of beer to start with. Something that's really getting quite popular at the moment is sour beers. So real acidity and stuff. So actually try those different types, and then everyone's palate is very different. So not everybody's necessarily going to taste the same thing. So I think it's like really important to go from different spectrums, whether it's a lager, so more of a kind of basic flavor, all the way through to a kind of sour beer or a stout. Okay, something like that, where you get a lot more complexity. But yeah, lager, IPA, start with that. So a Lost Lager, a punk, Hazy Jane, from what you do. That's definitely a kind of a good introduction there.
Mhm. What are some of the important factors you consider while, storing or serving beers, and how can people ensure that, they get the best possible experience from the beers?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things, and especially around our bars, when we have any problems, whether people think maybe it sort of doesn't taste right, how to like you say, get that best experience, it's all about temperature. So
Right.
making sure where you're storing your beer is at the kind of correct temperature. Because if a beer storage is going 5-10 degrees, and that storage, whether it's a cellar, cold room, whether if it gets warm, that beer's just going to taste off. It's going to be foamy. It's going to be warm. It's going to degrade. So one of the kind of biggest things is absolutely keeping it at the right temperature. And as I said before, a bit around the storage of the beer, whether it's in a can, you don't want to, or if it's in a bottle, you don't want to expose it to too much light. So making sure if you have a glass bottle, making sure it's stored somewhere dark, and if you're storing them in a fridge, anything like that to serve to a guest, making sure you kind of rotate it. You always want to make sure that the guests are getting that kind of freshest beer. But one of the biggest things that I say to anybody that I'm training, or any bars, especially that we're opening, is look after your storage. Okay, so whether it's a room, cellar,
Mhm.
whatever, make sure it's cold. Don't keep the door open. I know it sounds really silly, but making sure that you're maintaining it and you're looking after all the equipment, even the lines, so from the cellar to the tap, making sure it's kept clean and just looking after your equipment. That's the kind of like that's the real biggest thing there for me.
Right. Also, like, how do you go about selecting beers for a beer menu, like, for a restaurant or maybe for a bar, or a
Yeah,
brewery? Yeah.
so much stuff. So first one that you really want to think about is the range. So you really want to make sure that well, especially at BrewDog, we want to make sure we have a wide range of different styles. Okay, whether it's different lagers or stouts or IPAs, ciders, and that kind of variation. So making sure when we have different types of beers, we're really showcasing different types of hops, malts. Okay, so making sure that we're sort of using different ingredients. So it's all about that. It's all about that kind of variety. Excitement, I think, is something that we really want to consider. We want people to try something amazing every time they visit one of our bars, restaurants, whether that's a new beer or a kind of quirky style that maybe we brewed in one of our small outposts, or limited editions, or things we're just going to brew one time just to experiment. It's something that we really like to do at a BrewDog. We also want to, when we're picking the different styles, different types, we also want to look at the different ABVs, so the different strengths. Okay, we want to look at maybe some more entry level, what we call sessionable beers. So things that are lower ABV, but people can have a couple on like a summer's day and in a social environment. But also we want some of those more punchy beers that maybe have a slightly higher ABV that you want to drink a bit less of, but there's so much more weird and wonderful things that we can do with those higher ABVs. So we want to make sure we're not just going for the standard 4 to 6%. We really want that range. And finally, we just want our teams. It's really important for our teams and our kind of management. They're really buying into the different types of beers that we're kind of putting onto our menu. So making sure we're engaging our teams is so fundamental, because for us at BrewDog, we want everyone to be as passionate about craft beer as we are. And to keep our teams passionate, we have to think about them as well, because they're talking about it to our guests.
Mm-hmm. How do you keep up with latest trends and innovation in the beer industry, and what are some of the exciting recent times?
Okay, so I mean, some of the things I like to do, personally, to stay ahead of the game, listen to podcasts. I've got a really good friend of mine. He's one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about beer, and he does a great podcast, which sort of he covers lots of different things, lots of different styles, but other podcasts. That's because I travel a lot, so it's really it's an accessible way for me to listen and find out what's happening. Also, we have a lot of brewers, whether they're in our smaller sites where we have mini breweries, or in our head offices, our kind of big sites. They're so passionate. They make our beer and they have all that information. So just speaking to them, for me, I find it's kind of super important. So actually, it's just sort of talking to people. I'm the head of training, and I like to think I'm a relatively bit of a beer expert. But actually, there are some people around our businesses who work in different bars around the world who do so much more. They do the reading, they do the qualifications. So I like to speak to people, read. There's so much resource out there. That's a really big way for me to keep an eye on the sort of trends and what's kind of coming down the line. Some of the more exciting stuff that I've seen recently, alcohol-free beers. I know it sounds strange for some, but I'm biased, of course, but Punk. So we call them AF beers. So Punk AF, for me, is by far one of the best alcohol-free beers I've ever tasted, because it's, you get some alcohol-free beers that you can kind of tell that they're not actual beers, but with Punk and with our alcohol-free range that we do with Hazy Jane, Elvis Juice, Lost, it's really hard to tell the difference, and I think that's great. And there's loads of other companies out there, even outside of BrewDog, that are experimenting with some great ways to really make that quite accessible, because people are so find health such an important part of their life now. Being able to tap into that with our alcohol-free range is excellent. Sour beers is really coming into its own. Took me a very long time to appreciate that. They say when you have a sour beer for the first time, you need to sort of have about 4 different sips of it, because the first time you're just like, this, what is this? And then, but actually, when your palate kind of gets accustomed to it, it's kind of, it's just fascinating the way that they make those sour beers, really coming into their own now. So you're seeing quite a lot of that, and we're seeing stouts are starting to sort of come back as well. So Guinness, things like that, and more importantly, our launch of a Black Heart, which is going down great. There seems to be a lot more people who are sort of trying their stouts, making a big splash at the moment.
So we spoke about trends and developments, and like we had this conversation about the alcohol-free beers as well. I want to know from you, what do you think? Like, how has because we've seen, a consumer shift over these years, post-pandemic as
Mhm.
well. How do you think the consumer preference has changed over these years?
I think it's been really interesting. The kind of when you say the consumer preference, I said I've been in the kind of industry for about 20 years,
Mhm.
and the kind of consumer, the guests, they have so much more knowledge now. And I think, so there's that sort of expectation when a guest comes to the bar or when we serve a guest at a table, they're coming into your bar into your restaurant. They've already looked on reviews or they've looked into the drinks that you serve. So they've already got a bit of knowledge. So it's really important that we keep up with that and actually give them that great experience. And that word experience for me is another key thing that's changed. Like, you've got so many pubs and bars, restaurants in the hospitality industry. Guests now want to get value for money. And that's
Mhm.
not really about how cheap a beer is or how expensive a beer is. For me, it's making sure that they get that whole experience. And I think with Brewdog especially, it's something that we've really got our finger on the pulse with. We do different events. We do things that like no one else kind of does, and we do dog parties. We do kind of beer schools. Okay, we want to teach our guests, make them passionate, as I said, about beers. So experience, I think, is something that a guest really wants now. And I know I kind of touched on that earlier. Is that kind of lifestyle, healthy living? So we do, as I said, we do the alcohol-free stuff. We kind of we do some kind of low-calorie beers.
Mhm.
So I just think it's really understanding what the guests want now, and I
Mhm.
think they've just got a lot more information to hand, especially with social media, the internet.
Mhm.
So it's making sure that we are still those kind of experts and give them that kind of great experience.
What are like some of the challenges that the beer industry is facing right now, according to
I
you? Like,
think,
what are the challenges? Yes.
yeah, I mean, one of the topical ones I would say at the moment, especially around the kind of UK, Europe and stuff, is a lot around the cost of living.
Mhm.
Prices are going up. Consumers have less disposable income. So I think,
Mhm.
with everything that we're facing and various economic co conditions, especially post pandemic. So I think it's really, we've got to think about how we can really help them and how we can kind of really appeal to that market of people that don't have maybe as much of that disposable. So that's definitely something that I know that we felt in the UK and in Europe. So I think that's definitely a big kind of challenge. But I think we've had to evolve, and I think what some of the great things that I've seen, especially in the Indian market as well, is using more locally sourced ingredients, whether that's
Mhm.
the malts, the barleys, okay, the types of yeast, but experimenting with different flavors, spices, and stuff. So I think we're having to be a bit more savvy in kind of how we make our beers,
Mhm.
but still giving them that premium product there too. So working a bit smarter, and I think, but actually, really still being able to give a great product, but still is accessible to the masses.
Can you tell us, your favorite food and beer pairing? Because it's very difficult for consumers to kind of know what to pair with what exactly. So a lot of people,
Mm,
they don't know what exactly they can pair with a lager or what they can pair with an IPA. So like, can you help us
mm.
tell us some of
Uh,
your favorite? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really big thing now. Like again, it kind of never used to be such a
Mhm.
science.
Yeah.
I think, and I think in the last couple of years, um, I think with food being such an important market for hospitality, but more so for kind of like Brewdog, it's something that I'm quite like talking about now, teaching myself. But for me, the kind of fundamentals are making sure that you're not having a beer that overpowers the food that you're eating,
Mhm.
because so what you want to do, the sort of terminology that I use, you want to make sure that you're complementing the drink and the dish, or you're contrasting. So
Mhm.
so for example, IPAs. are great for real spicy foods. Okay, so I think but also things like steak. So you kind of red meats because you've got the bold flavors of the IPA with the really bold flavors of really spicy food. So they go quite well together. One thing when it comes to spicy food is to avoid the more carbonated drinks, so the more fizzy drinks, like some of your lagers and things, because actually the fizz of that can really amplify the spice and it can overpower it. So that's where a kind of IPA, if you like your kind of red meats, or if you like your spicy food, that's an IPA right there, because that's that real complement there. A kind of another example of a kind of complement would perhaps be a lager. It's quite a refreshing, crisp drink there. So really good for salads, or if you're just having some chips or some fries. Okay, really good with the saltiness of the chips. Goes really well with a crisp lager, like Lost Lager, for example, would be great. So I would go with that. If you're looking at more darker beers, so for example, like our Black Hearts, our stouts, that's quite a heavy, quite bold, dark drink. So you're looking like goes well with desserts, quite a lot of shellfish, funnily enough, barbecues. Okay, so again, you've got those kind of more rich, darker kind of textures there. But IPAs, I would say because they've got loads going on. You don't want a salad and a punk, because that punk, the kind of hoppiness and the dank of it all, it's going to completely take over that salad, and you're not going to taste anything. So it's really, really important that you want to complement, or you kind of want to go like sweet and sour. Again, that kind of that sort of contrast also goes quite well.
I have this question. What is that one piece of advice that you would like to give somebody who wants to, enter the beer industry or wants to become a beer expert? What is that one piece of advice you would like to give them?
Try beer, different beers. I think, and actually things that you think you're not going to like. So this is something that I've done myself. I never used to like dark beers. I never used to like sour beers, but because I wanted to understand beers, I wanted to talk about it, and because I was so passionate, is just try beers. And I think and a good thing, if somebody wants to learn about beers, and again, it goes back to that experience that we do within BrewDog. We give tasters to everybody. If you're not sure what you want to drink, the teams at BrewDog will give you a taste of whatever you want. So actually, you might find something. There's nothing better than actually giving somebody something they would never normally try, and it kind of just completely blows their mind. But if you're somebody that wants to learn more about beer, it's just the kind of craft beer in industry is so vast now with all the different stuff. Try things, find out what you like, maybe find out what you don't like, and then that's the biggest bit of advice, is just try them and go into a BrewDog bar and try them, because they'll let you try loads.
And also, I feel like it's so important to start experimenting with your palate as well, because you'll start knowing like what exactly you like and what you don't. So it becomes easier. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. And the kind of funny thing about the palate, your palate changes as you get older. Like, so it's, if there's something, so, as example, I never used to like stouts. So I would never have a Black Heart, but actually now 10 years that down the line, and I was like, okay, I will try it again, and I did, and it's just changed. The red wine's a kind of another example for me. Never used to touch the stuff, but I love a steak with a good red wine. So I think it's really important that if there was something you didn't like a few years ago, your palate does change, and and it can take a while to train your palate. I think I mentioned earlier, like, it's such a complex thing, and everyone's palate is different. So just have fun, play around with it.
We've talked about so many beers. Like, what is your go-to beer?
Ooh, I mean, it was the first beer that got me into it. If I go into a BrewDog beer, I'll have a pint of punk. Like, if anybody's wanting to try something different, I would always say go and try a punk. But if you're maybe not a fan of beer, or not a fan of kind of IPAs or anything like that, maybe try a kind of New England IPA. So like I like Hazy Jane, because it's not bitter, it's not hoppy, it's fruitier. So actually, for an entry level beer, I would absolutely go for that. And if I'm not in the mood for something bitter, I will go for that. Especially the guava one that we do. It's amazing. So Hazy Jane Guava and Punk. Oh yeah, I think I go Punk because for me it's the kind of original. But me and my other half, we love Hazy Jane Guava there too. So I'm going to go with two.
Okay, so because I don't think we have much time left now,
Yep.
my last question to you is, what's next for Brewdog? What are your goals and objectives? What are the plans?
I mean, so much at the moment. I mean, we're doing, our sort of big thing is beer, people, planet. So
Mhm.
we're going to continue to look at how we can be more sustainable as a kind of business. It's really a big passion of James and Martin, our kind of founders. It's really at their heart is making sure that we have a planet to brew beer on for future generations. So we will continue to look at real innovative ways of how we can make our beer, but reducing. I mean, we're already a carbon negative
Mhm.
brewery, and we were the first ones to kind of ever have that title. Um, and I think we want to build on looking after our planet more and more, and actually going more global. Okay, especially within the India market, that it's such an emerging market, the sort of craft beers and what they're doing with the local breweries there too. And we're going to continue to open more bars within the India market and actually tapping into other countries that maybe haven't got as much of a craft beer industry or maybe experience. As I go back to our mission, we want to make people as passionate about beer as we are. So we want to take that message out to the world. So it's super exciting to see how we're going to become more sustainable and how we're going to just kind of be the real leaders within the craft beer industry.
Well, all the best for that.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you so much for giving us your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It
Thank
was a
you.
pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.